So hello everybody.
Okay, where you want me? Yeah.
So some years ago, I wouldn't have thought that we stand here talking about AI in Davos, which is a really strange thing for me. We too read a lot of science fiction in our youth, and there were all these AIs controlling the universe, traveling through it and whatever. And now it's serious business. So I counted at least 6 official and maybe 10 unofficial events in Davos covering this topic, which is really a really strange thing. And today, so I'm talking to Alexa at home and to Siri when I'm on my way to somewhere else. And by sheer chance, we have the most perfect panel here to talk about AI. We have one of the most prominent researchers when it comes to the field of deep learning, which is at the end the thing we are talking about when we talk about AI today. So mainly all the projects going on at Google, at Facebook, at all the other outlets are mainly about deep learning. And Jürgen Schmidhuber invented many of the things behind this infrastructure. Very warm welcome. And so this is the boss of Watson. I don't know if you're aware, so if you're watching TV or reading the papers or whatever, you stumble over this brand. At the end, it's an umbrella brand for all the AI activities at IBM for quite some time. So Watson plays Jeopardy and wins, and Watson talks to Bob Dylan about his songs. It's the greatest spot you ever had, I'm sorry to say. And Watson analyzes the songs of Dylan and says, your songs seem to be mainly about people dying or something, and the life comes to an end and love comes to an end. And Dylan says, that sounds about right. Yeah. So I like that. So you're the boss of this platform, which shall make something like $10 billion in 10 years. We talk about that later. And Florian, by the way, tomorrow IBM will publish the new revenue numbers for figures.
Yes, we will.
Yes,
watch
so
tomorrow.
You can comment on this.
There are reporters in the room. Watch tomorrow.
So this is Florian. He's German. He comes from Schweinfurt. You don't have to know this place. It's in Franken. But he's working in San Francisco. Okay, who knows Schweinfurt?
Man. Wow. Wow.
Okay, this is, and he's now working at a small place called San Francisco with a little startup company with a valuation of, I'm not allowed to say, I would estimate something between 50 and 100 million in just 1 or 2 years. He is the most prominent investors of Sand Hill Road, also Microsoft, HP, and so on. And he's building the basic infrastructure behind AI, if I'm allowed to simplify it like that. So Mesosphere, his startup, is building the basic layer. So he will be something like the Bill Gates of cloud computing. So,
thank you.
Good luck.
Wow.
And the worst job for on the panel has the lawyer, as always.
As always,
we will talk about the ethics of AI, which is the major topic also here in Davos. What do we do with all? So the thing you all know is the self-driving car, which has to decide, should I kill my driver or should I kill the people on the road? And Joey Ito, so yesterday there was also a great panel about AI, and Joey Ito, the head of MIT, said, we did some research on that. We asked people, would you like a car that kills you to save the people on the road? Yes, that's a great idea. Would you buy that car? No. So, Jürgen, we read all this science fiction stuff. 10 or 20 years ago, you started to build the basic infrastructure in theory that never worked out. So people talk about, in your field, about several winters of AI. You get billions of dollars and nothing, and billions of dollars and nothing, and again, billions, hundreds of millions and nothing. And now it seems to work. So I always wanted to ask this sport reporter question, how do you feel now?
That's a pretty good feeling.
Yeah?
So maybe to give some context, all of you may have a little piece of us in your pockets. Whenever you talk to your smartphone, you say, okay, Google, show me the way to Davos. Then there's speech recognition going on, and it learns to recognize your speech and translate it into a question. And what is doing that? That's a method which is called long short-term memory, which has been developed in my labs, first in Munich and then in Switzerland, since the early 90s and perfected until 2006 or 2007. And that's more or less what is now powering the speech recognition, not only of Google, but of many other companies. And back then, when we started to develop that with my brilliant students like Sepp Hochreiter, first author on the first paper on LSTM, or Felix Geers and Alex Gray, who helped to improve it, back then, very few people, just a few experts were interested in that, because in principle it was clear you wanted to have a general purpose recurrent neural network that can learn all kinds of things that are hard to learn, that can learn to become a better problem solver. But commercial interest back then was zero, and part of that was because computers were so slow. And we have profited a lot from this trend, which makes computers faster by a factor of 10 every 5 years. That's a trend that has held since 1941, when Konrad Zuse built the first program-controlled computer, and it could do roughly one flops, one floating operation per second. And today we can do 10 to the 15 times as many for the same price, roughly. So 1 billion times more for the same price, which means that for the first time we can compete with little animal brains, and then for the first time we can do the things that kids find so easy: pattern recognition, speech recognition, video recognition. Suddenly we can do that using these old techniques from the previous millennium that we have developed. And the same thing is not only learning speech, but also just a couple of weeks ago, Google announced that they have a new translation system going on, and it's much better than the old one. From English to Chinese and certain other language pairs, much better than the old one. And at the heart, there's also this long short-term memory.
We did a test with it because I also read that. So we asked native speakers to test the new Google translation.
How is it?
Deep learning. So it still mixes homosexual with a member of the party. So I'm not sure if it's really that correct, but it's much better than the old one. In Chinese.
Maybe we don't want to go into the details of that one.
However, it's the same bird in Chinese.
Just to appreciate how little it was appreciated back then, we just celebrated our 20-year anniversary. Because 20 years ago, our first submission on LSTM to a peer-reviewed conference got rejected.
Okay, so to summarize that, it's a great feeling to be right? And
I can't deny that.
And so I have some fear now, because you used to be right for 20 years and nobody believed you. And you also say that machines will be really intelligent, general problem solvers, building other machines, flying to space, colonizing the whole space and ignoring mankind. So when will that happen?
Well, yeah, I think this is going to happen, and it will not take so many decades. Nobody can predict the future. But if this trend continues to hold, and there's no physical reason why it shouldn't continue for a couple of decades, every 5 years, a factor of 10, then by 2041, so 100 years after Zuse, we should have something like a cheap device which can do 10 to the 20 operations per second, which is clearly more than what a human brain seems to be able to do. And another 50 years after that, a cheap device which can do as many operations as all 10 billion human brains together. And there won't be only one of those, but there will be millions and trillions of them. And of course, they are going to realize what humans have realized a long time ago. Most of the resources in the solar system are not in the thin film of biosphere. They are out there in space, and less than 1/1,000,000th of the light of the sun hits the Earth, and the rest is wasted. And it's not going to stay like that. And you will have trillions of self-replicating robot factories out there in the asteroid belt and elsewhere, and the AI civilization is going to expand in a way where no human can follow. So that's the difference to the science fiction authors of the previous century, because they were really human-centered and they had to invent warp drive and superluminal flight and so on to make the short lifespans of humans compatible with the long distances in the galaxy. But the AI civilization is not going to have any problems with the limits of physics in a couple of hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years. They will cover the galaxy with senders and receivers such that AIs can travel the way they are already traveling in our labs, which is by radio from sender to receiver. And there will be a disconnect. So in many ways, this will not be driven by humans. This is more than just another industrial revolution. This is something that transcends humankind and is compatible with the invention of life itself 3.5 billion years ago. A new way of life is emerging, and the universe wants to become intelligent, and we are going to help it along.
He's always like this. It's amazing. Florian, you built the basic stuff necessary to run all these new AI applications. So we were talking about the last 5 to maximum 10 years that very strange things happen, and you were in the center of that. So Florian worked for Twitter. He's the killer of the Twitter fail whale. Who knows the Twitter fail whale? You know Schweinfurt, but not the Twitter. So when Twitter was a really young company, it always crashed. And when it crashed on the website was a little whale with 2 birds carrying the whale away. This was the Twitter fail whale. So Twitter was unusable when it got really popular, and you killed that problem with your friends, one has to say. And now you're the founder of Mesosphere. And also Siri or also self-driving car applications are running on your software. So what happened?
So I think in the last 10 years, what happened is, first we really made compute much more accessible, right? So with the advent of the cloud, right? Any developer can go in, swipe a credit card, and get compute power that beforehand you had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on. You had to wait a long time. You had to hire lots of people. So that was the first step. The second thing, and that happened roughly around the same time, open source became a real thing. How many of you know open source? What that means? Freely available software, right? And oftentimes, actually, competing companies are working on the same set of applications or libraries that are the building blocks for new applications. And so a community of developers can actually get together and implement the things that Jürgen's team builds in theory, right? Where they write the papers for it and maybe have one reference implementation someone else can take and continue building and improving it. So those 2 things. And then I think the third thing is that you actually now have real applications. So you have the Alexa at home, and the Alexa really is a mashup of a number of AI or ML technologies. So is your phone, and so is a self-driving car. A self-driving car has to do image processing. It actually uses, it has to do a lot of data processing on the back end, because a car that's driving on its own needs a 3-dimensional map. It doesn't work with a two-dimensional map. It needs much higher resolution in that map. And with all of these use cases now, you basically have an ecosystem that's self-reinforcing, and more of these applications are coming to life.
Okay. You want to do real business with that stuff, right? So you're betting. Yeah, tell us about that. So IBM has a problem. So it's more than 100-year-old company transforming itself again, and there's a huge bet on cloud computing and AI, yes. And you are the boss.
Yes.
So what are the so no pressure, yeah, right? 18 quarters of falling revenue in a row, which is fine. It's just a transformation. But what are the most interesting fields at the moment in AI? Where's the most revenue for you at the moment?
So I'm not going to disclose the exact numbers, but I would say it's this part of the business is growing quite rapidly. 3 areas that are growing. The first is the ability to understand, reason, and learn deeper amounts of data. So before we go colonize Mars, what we're learning today is law. So law, Watson's a very good, there's technologies to help do the work of paralegals and help with bankruptcy law. It's learning accounting. This may sound boring to you to do accounting and auditing, but if it's possible that Watson can close the books of every bank every day and not only look backwards, but actually look forwards at the value of an asset, it changes the risk profile. We're very deep in genomics and radiology and MRIs. The fact that we've worked with the Barrow Institute to find 5 new strains of DNA related to ALS gives us a chance to solve this. The fact that we have patients in Japan who come in and find exactly which strain of blood cancer, leukemia they have and get the right treatment and live, people are paying for these things. So I would say as we are helping these professions learn their data in a much deeper way, shorten greatly the amount of time to get to a decision, bring in data they never thought of. It's helping all of these professions become stronger, give better service, and very faster. So, and this is all sold as a subscription in each of these fields.
You can also use Watson as an API, right? So parts of the service is available on the net.
Well, all of it is a platform. So all of it is the way software works today is in composable services. So we expose the basics, about 36 services. Some people build their own. And some of the ones I'm describing were built by others, and they pay us rent to use those. And in some cases, they'll hire IBM to actually build the application.
Do you know my favorite Watson application?
I have no idea.
It's on GitHub, so where programmers push their code out.
The conference call one.
Yes, I love it. Do you know it?
So
yeah, you have to explain. It's wonderful.
So sometimes we have fun with Watson. So this is not a big money maker, but a kid, Watson's very good at speech to text. So a kid trained Watson to listen to conference calls when he was on them from California to the East Coast. So it listens to the conference call. If you are called on, if your name is mentioned, it sends you a text. It gives you 30 seconds, and it gives you a text of the last two minutes, so you kind of see what they're talking about. Then it goes into the conference call and says, "I'm sorry, my phone was on mute." This gives you a total of 32 seconds to be ready to respond. So I use it every day.
I love it. So,
it's fun. Yeah.
So the most recent application you can find in the news is a Japanese insurance company firing 30 people because Watson is taking over their job. I know this is kind of
yeah.
But I won't blame you for this because this is happening all the time. If you talk to big CEOs, some of them tell you after the 3rd beer that so they are reducing their staff 80% in several parts of their companies already, and they're replaced by software. So it's just a normal thing happening these days, right?
Well, I didn't issue that press release. I would say
you didn't.
No, but I would say broadly in our company and in our clients, we find more jobs being created than lost. It is true that basic functions are being automated to save time, to get to faster decisions, but then more humans are needed to make more cerebral decisions. So, in fact, we're growing in hiring people, and so are the companies deploying this. We've seen this for decades. If you look at the population in healthcare, the workforce has grown as technology has automated so many of the basic functions because we're able to do higher order things. So I would say yes, it is disruption. People need to learn new skills. One of our principles at IBM is to make sure we're investing in our skills, investing back in education. I don't want to give a simple answer, but I don't believe technology just takes the jobs away. I think it creates more jobs than it displaces.
My favorite study about this is some years old from Oxford, from Mr. Fry and Osborne, and they did a really deep analysis of the jobs, especially in the US, and predict that 50% of them will go away or change to something else.
Yes.
And there's an interesting experiment. So this is Davos. I have to ask is, who has a real job? Who has to earn his money by real work? So.
Only half the room.
Oh, half the room. So if you look in your branch of the industry, do you think that some of the jobs will go away due to software in the next 10 years? Who thinks that?
Of course.
Oh, all of them. Okay. So think about your...
But do you also think new jobs will be created?
No.
Yes.
Okay. Who thinks that his or her own job will go away in the next 10 years? So, one. It's always one. It's always one. With one exception, I asked this question at an AI research conference, and 30% of the room made this, like you. You know better, right?
I know a little bit better, yeah. However, I'm hesitant to say 10 years, but I'm going to live to see it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the motivation of my life, has been since the 80s.
So most of the time it sounds like we're talking science fiction here, but just a week ago, the EU Parliament wrote a draft about how to handle AIs in the future, how to make law out of all the things going on. It's really interesting because you find there, for example, the 3 laws of robotics written 50 years ago by Isaac Asimov, a science fiction writer. It's now stuff for the European Parliament. Do you know the laws again?
I know the laws, and I know that the stories live from being inconsistent, from these laws being inconsistent. But the first law says, and the first one is already not possible to implement, it says a robot has to make sure that all the humans are protected and that no human will suffer any harm through lack of action of the robot. This requires, for example, perfect pattern recognition. In Isaac Asimov's stories, you always had these androids. They looked like humans, but they were androids. And then how do you now quickly decide, is that guy over there, is that an android or is it a robot? You need perfect pattern recognition just to implement the first law, and that's not possible. And then we are not even speaking about the logical inconsistencies of the other laws.
So you're the IT law expert. Do you have, and you read all this stuff, do you have the feeling that we already know how to deal with thinking machines?
Well, not at all, actually. The fact that Asimov's laws are cited in this report shows how helpless the legal committee is. And let me phrase this in another way. How early stage the legal discussions are. When I hear what my co-speakers just have said, I mean, this is really very, very exciting stuff, but it clearly shows that there are many, many legal implications that have to be considered, legal implications in various fields of laws. And actually, I have a question for you, Jürgen. You seem to be very excited about self-replicating robots in the future. And the report that has been issued last week by the legal committee of the EU Parliament also says that it might be worthwhile to consider to grant to advanced robots, as they are called in this report, a dedicated own legal status, a kind of electronic personality.
So I could sue my car, right?
Yes, for example. Well, Jochen, you say it. That all sounds very futuristic, but the background is a very practical one. If we have an electronic person, then this electronic person could take responsibility for its own actions and for its own decisions. And finally, yes, it could take liability if something goes wrong.
So do lawyers dream of electric trials?
Well, at least not me personally. No, I don't think so.
This car A versus car B, so my Porsche against the Mercedes, right?
No, I don't think that this is something that would happen. Actually, to again, aside from this report that you just mentioned, the report says that it would be a good thing to have a strict liability for these autonomous devices, for all appliances which are equipped with artificial intelligence. This means that we would not have to look for responsibility in the sense of negligence or something like that, but there would be a strict liability, and if a damage occurs, then this has to be covered by an obligatory insurance that has to be taken out by this electronic person. So to have some financial funding behind potential damages.
One of the problems, me as a journalist at least, so we are alarmed by stories like neural networks finding their, so Google has 2 examples which are really amazing. So they found out that their AIs, when they translate from one language to the other, they found a distinct language humans don't understand to communicate the meaning of one language to the other language. But you can tap into it, you just don't understand what they're talking about. Or they try to have deep learning algorithms of inventing new encryptions, and they invented encryption we can't crack. We just, so what's going on?
What's going on there? So it's the nature of these neural networks, or for example, the LSTM networks that are used by Google Translate, that they invent internal representations that are useful for solving whatever problem they are supposed to solve. For example, translating from English into Chinese, but then also from English into French and so on. And then if you use the same system for doing these different tasks, Chinese and French, then the natural consequence is that you get internal representations that are useful for both things, which means that if you do that with 10 different languages, then you get internal representations that are useful for all kinds of languages. So you get something like an interlingua. And this is not a new phenomenon. That is something that you have observed in neural networks for many decades. It's just becoming more pronounced now because these recurrent networks are really powerful and can implement arbitrary computations, essentially. And because computers are getting faster, so just suddenly the whole thing has something to do with what we know, which is languages, and maybe you know that a guy who already is a language genius, who knows 10 languages or maybe 20, he learns a new language like that. Because he sees the pattern behind the languages, how languages are shifting just a little bit like Dutch and German. Once you have figured out how these sound shifts and letter shifts work, then you can almost predict certain words without even having seen them. And the same thing is happening in these neural networks, which then create these generalized internal languages. So it's not astonishing, but it's exciting.
Yeah. But when it comes to so if we have to find laws for machines, your boss said yesterday on the panel, so Ginny, the CEO of IBM, so we have to be really transparent, and it's all about trust.
Yes.
But if we do not understand our own machines anymore, so how can we trust these things, or these people, whatever, you know?
Well, they're machines, they're algorithms. So we're working to make it as transparent as possible. So when we have when the machine says it looks likely that this tumor is cancerous, and it looks promising that this clinical trial is the right trial for you to enter, so you give that advice. Then you say, these are the 4 pieces of evidence that I pulled from for the first diagnosis, and these are the 4 pieces of evidence I pulled for the second, and here's the percentage wise. So you can then make your own judgment. Most people will not. They'll take it. It's very rigorous. But we believe it is important, and we're fighting for transparency, because in the future decisions will be made that we won't understand. We won't, and it happens all the time. That today at the University of North Carolina found that they compared Watson to their tumor board. In every case, Watson had the same answer as the tumor board. That's the board of doctors who analyzed the tumor. And 30% cases, it proposed something the tumor board hadn't found at all. It's the same, exactly the same dynamic that you were talking about. It's extending and finding patterns below the patterns. We have to expose why it found it, so that there can be human judgment, and we have to expose it so that there can be trust, because otherwise, you know, we're depending on a system we won't understand. We have to help people be literate.
So maybe one quick comment on that. One should add that it's really possible to analyze these deep networks that have found tumors, for example. So it's not the case what you sometimes read, that nobody understands what's going on. No, you can trace back what exactly is happening. It's much easier to trace that back in an artificial network rather than in the human brain of a human doctor, who also comes up with some decision and maybe...
It's in my gut.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. I feel like it, yeah. Well, it looks like,
I believe
what I've seen there. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Or, you know, same for pilots or controllers of nuclear power plants. We can't really prove that this guy is going to stay sane forever, or maybe today his wife left him and he goes crazy and decides to take a couple of million people with him as he is letting the nuclear power plant go. So you want to make sure that your systems, especially the critical ones like that, are under control and do only exactly what they're supposed to do. In less mission-critical situations, like just improving search engines and so on, nobody cares exactly how the search engine found this new, better ad for me, or a better answer for a question. In the critical situations, one can figure out what's going on. So I'm sure IBM Watson is working hard on that as well.
David, can I ask you a question? You were talking about transparency.
Yes.
But apart from transparency, do you think that we would need established legal, ethical, and moral rules that have to be obeyed by designers and creators of artificial intelligence? Because the people from the legal profession, of course, are discussing such rules and would like to see them embedded in legislation as obligatory rules that would have to be followed by any creator of any form of AI.
Well, I think it's very important because the other thing, we were talking about human language, but we're increasingly using AI on things, right? So as in our Munich Center, we've got sensors and things, so they begin to work. Ethics are essential. And we're working to establish ethical standards. I think the challenge is who decides the ethics. Most people don't think it's the lawyers.
Exactly.
Right? So we have a couple of councils. So, and I think the law and the policymakers are pretty behind on the tech. So we did form a partnership between ourselves, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon. The partnership for AI, and the sole purpose is that it benefits humanity. And then we assess things to that. The input from it is lots of interesting sources. A Buddhist monk. There's a whole AI department in the Vatican. So religions are doing things. There are ethicists in universities. So we're trying to pull the folks who really think about human ethics and establish them. Then we have to be transparent. What ethical boundaries drove this inference, this decision?
Okay, that's interesting.
So that you can go back to it, because ultimately you do have to test it. I think the challenge is societies change. So agreeing what is ethical is important that we figure that out.
Florian, you're the only developer on stage. So, so do you think all the time about the ethics of the things you are doing? So you also work for Airbnb. In the technical department, did you think about all the people, all the hotels you killed through your platform? Is it a big debate in the valley about all these ethics, or is it just a misconception of lawyers and scientists?
It's certainly on most people's mind. But I think if you look at Airbnb, and I mean Davos, I think is full of people that stay in Airbnbs. How many here stay in an Airbnb? Actually, not that many in this room. I was at another event.
Bad Airbnb situation.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I think Airbnb really lowers the entry barrier for a vacation, right? I mean, a lot of people actually can't afford to stay at a fancy hotel, and they'd much rather stay at a home that maybe a private person rents out. So I think while of course it sort of reshuffles the industry of travel, I think it's actually net positive. And I think also a lot of owners of homes are maybe you can look at them now as small business owners. They're not necessarily large corporations. I think actually the majority of Airbnb properties are managed privately and not by large corporations. So that's certainly the case. And for companies like Mesosphere, for example, I mean, our technology is obviously widely usable, right? You can build a new cell phone app, but you could also build the back end of, well, something that's not necessarily positive for everybody. And I mean, I think technology in general always has these two sides to it. And yes, I think legislation is important, but I think in the case of Airbnb, is really not positive, and you shouldn't restrict the market and protect industries that, I mean, don't necessarily pay very well, or where the center of wealth is very concentrated to a few individuals, right? Like in the hotel industry.
Okay, so I get a lot of kill signs, so we have to stop this panel now. 3 last questions, yes or no questions. Should robots pay taxes? Yes or no?
Yes, of course.
No.
No.
Yes.
Do we need a general basic income
Probably.
for the rest of us?
No.
I think so.
No.
Should machines have human rights one day?
That was my question, actually.
Of course they should. But it will be more general rights.
Yes or no?
Yeah. Yes.
No.
No.
No, they should have machine rights.
More general rights.
Yeah, before we come to our next speaker, I have to introduce to you Uwe Jean Heuser. He's the smartest person at DIE ZEIT, and I have the feeling all the time that there's some secret AI built into his brain. You will realize when he asks the first question. So thank you very much for the great panel. And
Good to meet you.
Nice to see you. I'll see you.
stage is yours.
Do you prefer left or right?
Oh, it's fine. Whatever you like. Doesn't matter.
Same here.
Fine.
Forgive me. Can we?
Hey, good panel. Great up there. Bill McDermott, SAP. Nice to meet you too. Got a great business. Very nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Although, you shouldn't be disturbed by the time. We're going to change this around. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
If you walk. Yeah.
Okay, sure. It's okay. You can leave it. Yeah, it's kind of hot in here.
Should we get going? So, meine Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, I admire you all very much. When we came into this room, we realized that the temperature is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I guess it's due to the subject, it's due to the ZEIT, and of course it's due to Bill McDermott, the CEO of SAP, who, just like my wife, is a New Yorker. Just don't know which borough you're from.
I was born in Flushing, New York.
Right.
Queens.
Just like Donald Trump.
Yes. If you want to put it that way.
He studied in New York, but then he went on to get an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management, famous Kellogg School in Chicago. He worked for Xerox, some other companies before he joined SAP, was head of American business there, which was thriving at the time very much and still is.
Thank you.
He then went on to be on the executive board of SAP and became co-CEO and then CEO in 2014. My first question, Bill, is you being a manager, a marketing professional, and a man who understands management very well, how much do you really understand about AI? And I ask that as somebody who also tries to understand, but also always realizes there's so many levels underneath that are hard to grasp.
Yeah, what we try to do in SAP is understand things from the customer. And we have great engineers that write the code. I try to fit in to where the code and the AI makes a difference and impacts the way the customer runs their business. So, for example, we think of AI very much in intelligent applications. I am meeting with a customer right after our interview, and we're going to apply AI for payments reconciliation, fraud detection, resume matching. And if you think about the essence of SAP, just structurally, it's a HANA world. So for us, everything begins with HANA and putting information in memory and then letting the computer learn as part of the business process. So we're going to go at AI from an application and a business process perspective.
If any of you ask yourself now, what is HANA or who is HANA, It's not Bill's wife. It's the core software that we're going to talk about in a moment. There are two, before we do this, there's two sort of general lines of questioning with regard to AI, and they contradict each other, because one is it never delivers its promises, like it did in the 50s and the 70s and the 90s, and the other is when it delivers its promises, it's going to be very scary. Which of the two do you share more?
Well, I think both, to some extent, are probably true. For example, if you have a majority of blue-collar workers, for argument's sake, that are driving, whether it's a truck or a cab service, and their profession is to drive, and driverless cars come on the scene, and artificial intelligence now takes over the driving experience, that's going to be scary to a lot of people. And on the other hand, there's benefits to AI, because I don't think it replaces the human in most cases. I think it gives a nuance to the experience and the decision-making process. Isn't it better to have the data, the information, a strong point of view that over time gets better and better as the machine learns and the process improves? In the cases where somebody does get dislocated, I can't stress enough, we can't leave people behind. So yes, of course, there'll be new business models and new opportunities that emerge. But on the other hand, reskilling, educating people that have been taken by the digital divide and they don't see a positive future, we can't let that happen.
I wasn't planning to stick with this subject, but allow one more question.
Sure.
Because it's the general Davos
right.
Subject, but your take on it is very interesting. I have a hard time listening to people anymore saying we need more education.
Yeah.
Because it's basically an empty statement.
Yes.
So could you fill it with some substance for us?
I'd love to.
How do you reskill and educate people to live in this world?
I'll give you an example. In the mid-90s, I had the wonderful pleasure of serving on President Bill Clinton's Welfare to Work board when I was serving Xerox at that time. And the idea was, how do you initiate people that are uninitiated in the workplace and give them an opportunity? And what we did at that time is we created a forum for the public sector to partner with the private sector, and provided tax incentives and provided an environment where companies competed to actually help people. And at the time, there was a very slow process for hiring, because you had probably 95% full employment. So it was very hard to get people. You know, now you're in an environment where jobs in some cases are going away, especially manual jobs. I think we have to retool and reskill those people. This morning I was on the Information Technology Governors Committee, where we basically talked about partnering with WEF and coming up with a brand, a public and a private partnership, where we essentially took a page out of that kind of playbook, where the companies did the right thing, you know, this idea of being responsive and responsible, but also the public sector gets involved, because the infrastructure that it takes to pull this off is not easy. You have the education that could happen at the university level, but you also have small towns with people that are far away and completely not connected to the new economy. So things like massive online open courses might be very helpful for a young person that knows digital, but very unhelpful to a person who might be a little more mature and not so digitally savvy. How are you going to reach them? So I don't think it's empty talk to say, if the incentives are there, people can be responsive and responsible, but it really takes a co-innovation between the public and the private sector. It's the only way I've ever seen it work.
SAP, on one hand, enables companies to do their things more efficiently, more intelligently, faster, most of all. On the other hand, of course, these processes also destroy jobs. Would you say that, bottom line, SAP is in the business of cutting jobs or adding jobs?
Well, I like to think we're in the business of adding jobs. And I think the idea, first of all, in our company, of course, you know, I've been the CEO of the Co. with Seoul for the last 7 years. Can you believe how fast it went?
No.
It's unbelievable. And, you know, we have double the number of people in the company that we had then, and we're adding somewhere in the order of 7,000 or 8,000 jobs net this year. With very high retention rates, it's easier to do that, and ours is the highest in the industry, so we're quite proud of that. So I like to think we're a job creator, and we're proving that even as we grow, we're not minimizing jobs. We're just making sure that we put them in the right place where the customer needs them. I'm on the board of some companies, and I'm in the marketplace all the time. And where the jobs are going to go is where the consumer is going to go. So I think this idea of knowing more, caring more, and doing more for the consumer is our job. Because if you think about our role as a business-to-business company, that's the perception. But with the power of design thinking and innovation, you know the idea is to have great empathy for the customer's customer. And it's that single view of the customer and really thinking about a single source of the truth on the data. And then regardless of channel, whether it's direct to consumer, wholesale, retail, e-commerce, everything has to coalesce around our technology. If we do that right, companies that today, let's take retail as an example. All you have to do is pick up the Wall Street Journal or your wonderful narrative, and you'll see that brick and mortar is going away faster than we can, imagine. How are you going to make that up? Well, if you don't use technology and you don't think about that end-to-end value chain, you're not. And those jobs will go away. But if you can make it up, and you can innovate, and you can meet that consumer's ultimate destination, what they really want, then you'll be a job creator. That's what our job is.
Okay. You're right, you added a lot of jobs, but you also sent a number of people home by the thousands with nice pay packages, but still you did, which was part of a huge overhaul of the company.
Yes.
You bought a number of cloud companies. You changed basically the business model of the place.
Yes.
And where did you take the courage to know where to go?
That's a great question.
Somebody says it's a great question. I get nervous.
No, but well, I'll tell you how it all happened. The year was 2010, and we were coming off, as you know, the 2008 financial crisis. SAP, like most companies, was coming through 2009 rather slowly. There was a change in leadership, and the first thing I personally worked on for 2 weeks, day and night, was the idea. And the idea was to have a purpose-driven company based upon the following. We basically asked ourselves a tough question. If we weren't here, would anybody notice? Would anybody care? Do we matter? And then we said, okay, well, if you look at 25 industries and you look at the global economy, if you turn off the SAP system, this is innovation at scale. It's not innovation for fun. So we matter. The question is, are we relevant? And will we be the company that leads companies into the future, or will we be a remnant of the past? And we said our job is going to help the world run better, very authentic to what we do, but improve people's lives. And let me tell you what that meant. We always made industrial strength software, but the experience had to be improved. People had to love using it. It had to be simple. And that's where the Run Simple thing came in.
Your slogan?
No. We said run simple because today's companies are so complicated. Processes, structures, people not knowing what to do. if we could simplify that experience and we could change the way they run, and the use of the software was beautiful and it made them happy, we could be a great company. That led to the strategy. So now we had a purpose. And the strategy was pretty simple. We thought at the time that HANA, which is our high-performance application network appliance, this is an in-memory database. Okay? This is the standard in-memory database in the world. We said if this comes through, the only thing people need to remember about databases is that the disk was a nice remnant of the past. And we can write its obituary column because it's over. And then, if we could reinvent the ERP system on HANA, we would have the fastest end-to-end business process platform in the world. Then, if we could get very relevant at the line of business, the head of sales, the head of finance, the head of procurement, with cloud-based solutions, head of HR, cloud-based solutions where that business owner, who was at that time, you remember, Uwe, they were buying with OpEx, not CapEx, because everybody wanted to innovate quickly. They wanted to do it out of an operating budget, and only the cloud consumption model was fast enough to meet the customer needs. So we made some M&A moves, as you know, I guess in order of magnitude around 25 billion. And then we said, if you get all that under control, that could be a run simple company. But that's not enough, because what's going to happen in the global economy is you're going to have to do inter-enterprise computing with your trading partners. And that would involve things like procurement, the whole spend management process in the supply chain. I was on a panel yesterday with an executive from GE, and we were talking about jet engines and the procurement of parts, shipping it in an efficient financial network where it's a just-in-time delivery, but then you have to deploy the right person that knows how to fix that engine. And you have to do all this before there's ever any downtime with predictive maintenance. So now you've gone through a very complex business process with a network. So the network of the network becomes the new model for enterprise computing. And we did this with Ariba. Now we have 1 trillion running through the network. We did this with Concur, with travel and expense.
That's travel cost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Travel and expense with Concur, so you don't have to fill out expense reports, whether you're in a ground, air, food and entertainment, or a hotel game. We got you covered. And best of all, everything is updated in the ERP system without big expense report processes. I once had a millennial generation person, as we were going to meet the CEO of Concur to talk about this deal. I said, tell me what you're thinking about expense reports. He said, Bill, if you could prevent me from ever having to do an expense report, I don't ever need a raise. I said, okay, we take Concur. And then there was Fieldglass, which is very relevant because the fastest growing labor force in the world is temporary workers. It's growing at 45% year over year everywhere in the world. And this enables an efficient network to take people and apply them to a match where a job exists. Talk about AI, here's an AI application. And all of this now coalesced. So we had spend in the supply chain, efficient networks financially, and then your ERP and everything in real time. And this is where we are today. So why is the company prospering? Because we're innovating.
You have to give me an opportunity to ask a couple of great questions. Sure.
I'm not going to rush you.
No, I meant we have to be a little careful with time and the rhythm of okay. Question and answer. If you
But you having fun? Okay.
I'm not sure everybody knows what in-memory is. It was a risk that SAP took.
Yes.
Look up HANA. My question is, so far this has mainly saved companies a lot of time and hassle. This woman, Hannah. Now, with rolling out AI, of course, your claim is that it can also help them make decisions. Yes. Not just do simple tasks faster, but really make managerial decisions. Decisions about who to hire, decisions about how to structure certain parts of the company, I guess, and so forth. So how far is this going? What do you expect of AI to do there? If I was a middle manager, should I be scared of SAP?
No, no, no. You should think of SAP as your friend. Because the reason you should think of SAP as your friend is, let's take the hiring example. You know, one of the things I really believe in, and I know you do too, is gender equality, inclusion of all people, fairness, and humans have biases. You know, birds of a feather tend to flock together. So when you're hiring somebody, very often you hire people in your own image. That's what humans do. But a machine doesn't. A machine learning application can remove gender bias from the workplace. And that's a machine learning application that we have with SuccessFactors. So you can take a resume, perfectly match it to an open job, and the machine is totally rational. It understands what you want, and it matches the person. And it takes the bias out of the equation. There's many other nuances to that. So I think of that as, my friend, you're helping me make a better decision.
You know, they had a comparable, I guess, algorithm at Google developed for the selection of sort of the advances of software engineers.
Yes.
And then, in the end, the software engineers at Google, of all people, petitioned to not use this algorithm because they didn't feel comfortable with it. So the question is, how comfortable do you think people are going to feel with these substitutions of their own decisions?
I think it's a great question. The idea, he's good.
Again,
the idea is not to replace their decision making. It's to free them to make the decision. Isn't it better to narrow down the choice with good insight and let the machine help you? But ultimately, the human is still making the call on who you hire. So I think this is this very much as a complementary tool, not something that replaces judgment, insight, discretion, all human traits.
You know, I kind of guarantee you that, of course, some institutions are going to do it exactly that way. They're going to keep the human in the loop, as they call it.
Yeah.
But others won't. And this, you know, especially not if they don't like the decisions that people are making. So how do you make sure that your software is used in sort of a human way, if you want?
Well, we are a company that has to behave and build software with the right intentions. And you can only train and educate. Ultimately, we have a world where people have freedom of choice. And there's only so much of that we can control in our own image. But I tend to think with our brand, and we are the 22nd most recognized brand in the world, and I do believe that the best run businesses do run SAP. I think we have, for the most part, companies with good hearts and very positive intentions. There's always going to be humans within any large base in a big sample that disappoint you, but I hope the majority will do the right thing.
SAP had to reinvent itself, as we learned today, so it had lost its way a tiny bit.
Yeah.
How do you make sure this doesn't happen again?
Culture. It's a win. You know, a winning culture is hard to describe, but it starts with this notion of really putting people first. So, for example, managers get to make a lot of decisions. The one decision they don't get to make at SAP is how much education a person on the payroll is going to take. You are not allowed to cut the education budget, no matter what. So that money is reserved by the CEO, and that can never be sacrificed. So that's one example. Another example, we just got EDGE certified by Nicole Schwab and the EDGE organization for gender equality. And we have made massive strides on making sure we're a company where everybody's equal. Nobody has an advantage. And your business card doesn't give you any rights. Your behavior, your character, and the things that you do give you all the rights you need. And that really matters. So I think hiring new ideas, new people, going young. You know, we started an academy. I love this academy. I came to the conclusion that it's a zero-sum game, hiring other people's people from a software company to do the work we need to do. Because then I inherit their culture and all the behaviors that go along with that. So we just started hiring right at a university. And we're hiring and hiring at a university. In the last, I guess, around 18 months, we hired 750 young people at a university just in sales, right out of college. The majority of these hires are female, and the retention rate is in the 90s. And that's after we train them for a full year. So we don't let you on your own without the right education and mentoring until you've been with us for a year. Now that's a big investment. And I think people are seeing this. And I want to finish on one thing. You know, if you look at our employee engagement scores and employee satisfaction scores, they're better than they've ever been. But I don't celebrate that as a number. I celebrate that as a leading indicator that Hasso-Plattner was right when he said in 2010, Bill, give me a happy company. And I tell you, happy company, happy people, innovate, they care about their customers, and they do the right thing.
He made a happy person CEO, and the CEO made then a happy company. Given all the hype about HANA, especially the sort of S4, the new product, which weds it with, I guess, with AI. Right. I asked some competitors, what's wrong with HANA? One answer I got, and I hope I represent this correctly. Of course, I also got a lot of envy, but I'm
not surprised.
One was that in the end, HANA services are going to prove to be very expensive because you dive into the whole sort of into a huge database in real time to make decisions or come up with services that could be done much more cost effectively. So is HANA going to be too expensive?
No. HANA is not too expensive. The way you partition the data makes a big difference. So for example, most companies are very interested in what the sales are today, this week, this month, maybe even this year, maybe last year. But probably they're not interested in every analysis going back 10 years. So you can partition things, cold data and hot data, the things that you really need to look at. The other thing is we're very open. So if you think about data lakes and Hadoop and all the techniques to manage information in the lowest possible cost, we're completely abiding by that. And here's the big thing. HANA kills hardware. So if you think about the idea of cutting your hardware needs down by 90%, you got HANA. You figured it out. So we have many proposals where the hardware proposal before HANA was 20 million, and after HANA it was 2 or 3. If you think about SAP, we used to run our ERP system at SAP on 12 terabytes of data. Now it's down to 12 or 13. Now it's down to 3 or 4. So these are just huge improvements, and that implies less hardware, less complexity, more speed. For example, when we do a board meeting at SAP, we do it in a digital boardroom. Our supervisory board meetings are with a digital boardroom, all run by HANA. So if somebody wants to know what was sales like in China in the month of March 5 years ago, we ask HANA, we get an answer. So I think this idea of a real-time enterprise, not only is it here, but it's practical, it's efficient, it's cost saving compared to the alternative, and there's no reason to shy away from HANA.
Bill, thank you so much. As a European, I wish you all the best in becoming the Apple of B2B business.
Thank you.
And as a journalist, I'm going to watch whether your competitors are right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Go SAP.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.